Just to get the ball rolling, the agenda I think you've seen there. We will put that up every now and again, but we will start by first of all thanking everybody for joining us this morning. That's the first thing. This is a joint conference with ourselves, Irish Rural Link, and Rural Action, a very new and vibrant organisation across the border. And can I say, without any hint of doubt or anything, we are very pleased that Teresa Canavan, representing the organisation, is here, and I would like to thank her sincerely for the work her side and her organisation has put into making this conference happen. We will be seeing more of Teresa later on. Irish Rural Link have a strong tradition of working across border, going back to 1997, and we're glad that that tradition continues. Rural issues are rural issues, no matter what the ideology, the politics, the religion, or anything else. Rural issues are still rural issues, and they're often the very same, irrespective of what part of the country you live in, and even of Europe as well. So this is a conference that will look at the reality of voluntary and community organisations both sides of the border. We will look a great deal today about funding possibilities, and we have a great lineup of speakers ready to give us some advice and thoughts and observations into that. So at this stage, let me begin by welcoming formally you, Minister Humphreys, and thank you sincerely for taking time out in a really busy schedule to speak to us. Your department has done quite a lot of work in terms of rural initiatives over the last couple of years, and in particular the last year. The Rural Futures programme launched earlier this year is a very exciting programme, and probably has excited our members and the members of Rural Ireland a lot over the year. And I have to say, even the examples of the business hubs are just one example of the advantages that are going to come, linked, I suppose, to the COVID crisis, but also linked to a long campaign of ours to try and get people back living and, better still, working in rural Ireland. We know you, Minister, have a particular interest not just in rural affairs, but in all affairs because you live near the border. And I think you know the border better than many, many people. And that's why it's a double pleasure that you're here this morning. So if I may formally thank you and invite you to take the microphone. And as I said to everybody else, if your phone is on, just switch it off and we will hear the Minister. Minister, the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much, Seamus, and good morning to everybody. And can I just say that I'm delighted to be here today, albeit virtually. And I just want to thank Irish Rural Link for the opportunity to open this conference. And can I just say it's fantastic to see Irish Rural Link working in partnership with your counterparts, Rural Action Northern Ireland, to host today's conference. And I think it's a really exciting time for our rural communities, both north and south. As our society reopens and we move towards our post-pandemic future, I believe a real opportunity now exists to reimagine the potential of our rural communities and to maximise a recovery that benefits all parts of our island. At the end of March, I was delighted to launch our Rural Future, the Irish government's ambitious new rural development policy. Our Rural Future is a transformational, it's a whole of government policy which puts rural Ireland at the heart of our national recovery from COVID-19. And it does place a huge focus, as you said, on utilising remote working to attract young people back to our rural future. And indeed, we often, many times, we educated our young people. We said goodbye to them as they went to Dublin to get jobs. I want that to change. I want young people to have the choice to remain in their communities. It also will help to revitalise our rural towns and villages, and it will support our rural communities to shape their future. So when it comes to rural development, I'm a firm believer, of course, that success will only come from the bottom-up approach. It won't come from the top down. I know the things that my community need, and you likewise know the things that are needed in your community. You know the strengths that you can build on, and you know the weaknesses that you need to address. So again, I'm a strong believer in the bottom-up approach and consulting and working with local communities. The work carried out, of course, by Irish Rural Link, our PPNs, our LCDCs and SEUPB and others is critical in that regard. And of course, as you said, I'm a very proud Monaghan woman and a representative from the border region. And I'm absolutely delighted that the theme of today's conference relates to cross-border collaboration. And it's something I'm absolutely committed to. And I think it's fair to say that we have had a few very turbulent weeks politically in terms of North-South relations. From my own perspective, I do believe that it's incumbent on us all now as political leaders to redouble our efforts to engage in constructive dialogue with each other and to reach out the hand of friendship. We live on a small island, and as we emerge from COVID, we will face the same challenges and indeed the same opportunities, no matter what side of the border we live on. And I know from talking to my relations that live north of the border, that live in either Newtown, Butler or Lisnaskea or further afield, they all want the same things as I do. We want a quality of life, and we want to be able to rear our children and enjoy life. And we want to build and strengthen our rural communities. And we want, when we educate them, we want them to remain, if possible, and get good quality jobs within their own region. So I do believe that if by working together that we can achieve so much more and deliver greater results for the communities that we all serve. And so for that reason, we have already established a North-South Rural Policy Forum where experiences are shared from both sides of the border. As some of you will be aware, we're currently developing a network of remote working hubs all across the country to support and enable remote working. And one of the initiatives that I would like to see the North-South Rural Policy Forum I'd like to see them exploring how we can expand that initiative on a north-south basis so that our hubs are linked up and connected on both sides of the border. And it's something I did address with my counterpart in Northern Ireland, and I know officials on both sides of the border have been talking about it, and it's something I want to promote, because I want to see, in terms of our remote working hubs, that we can light us up as an island, as the whole of this island, that we can see easily that you can get a remote working hub in Armagh, or you can get it in Monaghan, or you can get it in Letterkenny or Derry. So it's about having that joined up approach for possible investment in this country where people are interested in pursuing remote workers, that we can say, here it is, we have it all in Ireland, and we're a leader in that space. The Shared Island Initiative, of course, launched by the Taoiseach late last year, seeks to strengthen and promote all-Ireland approaches to the challenges we face and to invest in key strategic collaborative projects through the €500 million Shared Island Fund. And in April, I was delighted, of course, to announce €13 million in funding provided by the Shared Island Fund and my own department here of Rural Regeneration Development, Rural Regeneration Development Fund, to support the next phase of the Ulster Canal restoration project. And I know one of your breakout sessions later will focus on rural tourism. And I strongly believe that cross-border projects like the Ulster Canal and the proposed Sligo-Enniskillen Greenway can bring huge economic benefits to the border region and enhance the lives of those living in our border communities. And particularly with the greenways, and particularly with the canal, the route would bring you through areas that are somewhat undiscovered, and it gives them a chance to have some benefit in terms of economic gain. For my own part, I will strive to ensure that those projects remain at the top of the agenda for both the Irish government and through engagement with my colleagues in the executive in Northern Ireland. Likewise, the Peace Programme and the future €1 billion Peace Plus programme provides a unique opportunity to support cooperation which foster a more inclusive society for all of us. And for those who aren't familiar with it, and I see Gina McIntyre here from the SEUPB, who certainly has been doing wonderful work in terms of the Peace 4 programme. So now we're going to move on to the Peace Plus. It's a new cross-border EU funding programme for the period 2021 to 2027, which will succeed both the current Peace 4 and the Interreg programmes, and will hopefully be approved by the European Commission by late summer. So the combination of the Peace and Interreg type activities into a single programme represents the inclusion of wider economic, social and environmental activities. And again, as somebody who's from the border region, I absolutely want to recognise the fantastic work that is made possible by the Peace programme, because I can see the real impact that it has on the ground in communities across counties like Cavan and Monaghan. We can see that very, very clearly, and it's a wonderful programme. And there's one thing we should never forget, is that we should not take peace for granted. We need to continue to invest in building those relations and making those connections on a cross-border basis. So the new programme will allow us to continue this important work, and I hope to see more exciting projects come forward in the future. Before I conclude, I really would like to acknowledge the work of Seamus Boland and Irish Rural Link, who champion the concerns of rural Ireland, and you are key, and you're a constructive partner from my department, and for that I just want to say thank you. Our Rural Future policy has gained a lot of international attention in recent months as far as Canada, America and Australia. So they have been making contact with us to hear more about the policy. So it's good to see that these countries are looking at Ireland as a leader in rural development. The policy was informed by extensive consultation with stakeholders and the public, and we're very grateful to receive the valuable contributions of Irish Rural Link as part of that process. The policy is intended to be a living document that evolves over time in response to the emerging needs of rural Ireland. So it's our intention to continue engaging with the people and the organisations working in rural areas as we implement the policy over the next 5 years. And this will assist us in ensuring that communities shape the policies that affect them, allowing government to maximise the unprecedented level of investment in rural Ireland and to help identify new measures for potential inclusion alongside those already outlined in our rural future. So we know that circumstances change over time, and we're determined to respond to those changes as they arise. And I have no doubt that through engagements like this, we will see an even greater focus on cross-border initiatives as part of our 2022 programme. So with that, I just want to wish you all the very best for today's discussion. And I really look forward to your continued support as we implement the new policy, and we look ahead with courage and optimism towards our rural future. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to address you. Goramila Mahgav.
Goramila Mahagud as well. Thank you, Minister. And I would like to ask our chairperson to formally reply and thank you. So Tom Lavin is our chairperson. Tom, I think you're there. Please take the microphone.
Yep. Minister Humphreys, sincere thanks to you on behalf of Irish Rural Link and Rural Action for taking the time to be with us this morning. We welcome very much the launch of our rural future. I was particularly struck by your talk this morning, or your input, and I just want to highlight three of the things you said. The bottom-up approach, it's key. Working together, we can achieve much more. And your emphasis on developing remote rural working hubs. We are acutely aware of your commitment and ability to promote rural and community development and to support an inclusive and sustainable community setup throughout Ireland. On our part, we're committed to fulfilling our role in implementing the action plan for rural development and thereby helping to realise our future rural potential. Again, we thank you for taking the time this morning, and we look forward to working with you and your department into into the future. Gomilama Agut. Thank you very much, Minister.
Okay, Tom, thank you very much for that. And maybe I would just ask Teresa Canavan, I know you will be chairing the first session, but before you actually formally chair it, maybe Teresa, on behalf of Rural Action, you will say a few words as well, please.
Sorry, I should have unmuted there. Thanks very much for that, Seamus and Tom, in terms of very kind invite to participate in today's conference. So good morning, everybody. As Seamus said, my name is Teresa Canavan. I'm the Chief Executive of Rural Action. If I could just say a very big thank you to Minister Humphreys for the encouraging and supportive remarks and for setting the tone for today's event. I suppose, like Tom and like what the Minister has said, we are also a very strong advocate and believer in the bottom-up approach and engaging communities in looking for rural solutions. I suppose we very much welcome today's opening remarks and are delighted to hear about the collaboration at a policy level on rural development and look forward to the joint actions that will come out of that. So we're very encouraged by what the Minister has said in relation to what's happening on a north-south level, and we very much would welcome opportunity to engage in those policy discussions in the future. So thanks very much, Minister, for those kind remarks.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, well, now we will probably begin the program formally. And as you can see, and James just put up the agenda to remind people again where we stand. As you will know, we will begin the first session this morning really is looking at the opportunities discussion panel, and that will be chaired by Teresa Canavan. And I know the speakers there are Paul Skinner, Gina McIntyre and Paddy Hart. So maybe we will formally begin this, just in case people are worried about the 2 or 3 hours glued to your screens. We will allow a break. There are 2 breaks planned, so don't feel too anxiety. I'm told that people tuning into Zoom conferences get very anxious that the toilets are nearby and the cup of coffee is on the boil. So you will get time to do that. So once again, Teresa, maybe I will hand over to you and you will introduce the panel and the subject. Okay, Teresa? Okay, thanks very much, Seamus. And thanks for running a wee bit ahead of time, which is good, because hopefully we have lots of discussion in this panel session as we go. So I suppose I just wanted to start as well, Seamus, maybe just for people who are unfamiliar with Rural Action, just to give you a wee bit of a background on us, and then we'll move into the panel proceedings. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Rural Action, we're based in Northern Ireland. As Seamus said, we're a relatively young organisation. We've only formed a little over 2 years ago. But I suppose as a staff team, we have a long track record steeped in rural and community development, grant administration, delivery of programmes, and working with the community and voluntary sector on the implementation of projects both north and south. We are currently the managing agent for the International Fund for Ireland for their Personal Youth Development Programme in Northern Ireland. We also manage and implement Peace 4 projects both as a lead applicant and a partner with Mid Ulster District Council, and we administer and carry out funding on behalf of our government departments. In particular, DERA, who's our Department for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, and more recently with the Department for Communities. We were in a previous life the Network Support Unit for the European Union Rural Development Programme in Northern Ireland, and during our time working with LEADER, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, we would have worked with the team at Irish Rural Link, particularly around cross-border cooperation. So we're delighted once again to be working on the theme of making connections and preparing for future opportunities and cross-border collaboration. And James actually earlier this week just reminded me about a conference we previously hosted together in Uri a number of years back. And there are still groups working in partnership that arose out of that conference. So today, if we can get a number of groups working together on projects, we'd be absolutely delighted. And I suppose that's the whole purpose of why we're here, to try and encourage groups to partner and to look at ideas around rural development. So on that note, I suppose just to get moving, I would love to introduce the panel
Our panel of speakers for this morning, we have Gina McIntyre, who's the Chief Executive of the Special EU Programmes Body, often referred to as SEUPB. We have Paddy Hart, the Chair of the International Fund for Ireland, or IFI, and we have Paul Skinner, who's the Director of Social Inclusion and Employment Operations with POBL. So we're delighted to have such a great lineup to kickstart the conference, and what a better way to do it than to look at future opportunities and the support available, and to pick up on the many years of experience that each of these organisations and indeed individuals have on working on cross-border North-South initiatives. So the format of this morning is I will invite shortly the panel members to introduce themselves and say a little bit about their organisation and their work. As chair, then I will explore this a little further with some questions to the panel, and then we'll open it up to the floor, so to speak. We do plan to finish around 11 so that we can move into the next part of the conference proceedings. If you do have questions as the panel are introducing themselves, please feel free to put them into the chat, and we'll do our best to pick them up, or if you want, we can direct them to the panel members part of the questions and answers shortly. So I'm just going to invite the panel to introduce themselves, to say a few words about their organisation and their work. Of no particular order, really, other than what I can see on the screen. So I can see Paddy here first, and then Paul, and then if Gina can come in after that. So if I can just hand over to Paddy, and then Paul, you can come in after that. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Teresa. I thought I was third. Anyway,
yeah.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Minister, if the Minister's still with us. On behalf of the International Fund, I would like to thank you for the invitation to speak here at a very aptly named conference, and on a topic that's very close to my own heart, and that's making connections. Very briefly about myself, the hospital I was born was less than 100 yards from the Donegal-Tyrone border. So like many people here today, I've spent a significant part of my life living in border communities. And from my experience personally and work-wise, living along the border, it sort of creates a kind of a social tissue that helps sustain relationships throughout all of the challenges that come our way, and many do in border areas. But we're very resilient as a community. And this resilience really comes about because of the amount of cooperation, the amount of collaboration, and more particularly the making connections that happen and quite very often happen under the radar and are everyday things. We're at a challenging point. Everyone is aware of the outworkings of Brexit. And these have been magnified by unprecedented impact of the pandemic, and many issues that we thought we would get time to deal with over maybe a 10-year period or more have come into focus again. We in the fund, for example, on a daily basis are facilitating uncomfortable conversations and challenging conversations to try and bring things to resolution so that communities can look forward to a future of hope and opportunity, as opposed to the one that some people feel at the moment. Where I was born, communities in Donegal and Tyrone were connected by bridges, and I see borders like bridges. They help to connect people in a very special way. Border communities create a kind of a creative friction where the diversity brings out much more innovative ideas, much newer ways of doing things. And I firmly believe, and I've worked in cross-border work with both Gina and Paul for a long time, that border communities who embrace their environment have the capacity to become innovative hubs, both economically, socially, and at the community level. And key to all of this is collaboration, and it's no coincidence that the Connecting Communities is the title of the fund's new strategy. Briefly, that's a bit of a background. I'm always very hopeful about cross-border work. It's always very exciting, and it always has the capacity to deliver really, really good, innovative things. For those of you who don't know, the fund set up in 1986 after the Anglo-Irish Agreement. It's sponsored by the British and Irish governments to bring forward economic and social advance and promote dialogue and reconciliation between the communities both sides of the island. That's in its essence. It is an independent international organisation. There's only one other like it in the world. I can't quite find out where it is. It gives it an independence. It gives it a freedom to be innovative, and that's our call for today. We want to talk to communities about doing things in an innovative way, and that's not coming up with the next big tech idea. That is doing very straightforward things in a different way, which border communities are uniquely placed to do. So that's why we're very pleased to be here today. Our programs initially were focused on economic disadvantage and promoting dialogue and reconciliation. We have been, it's widely acknowledged that a lot of that work at grassroots level put in place a lot of the things that were needed for the Good Friday Agreement. So below the radar, grassroots work became the hallmark of what we do. So we shifted from economic interventions to more community-based reconciliation, peace building, community development initiatives. So 90% of what we do is now there. I would say pre-1998, 90% of our work was in economic work. So that's the space we're in, and that's the space we would like to talk to you about. To date, the fund has invested something shy of €1 billion over its, and this is 35 years of existence this September. We have supported somewhere in the region of about 6,000 projects, predominantly at grassroots, under the radar work. What our work involves, very, very quickly, we have 3 programs that are coming from our old strategy, and one, the last one, which is most relevant for today, on our new strategy. Our current ones are our Peace Barriers program, which is about the removal or transforming peace walls. Our second program is our Peace Impact program, and that's where we're bringing communities together, maybe for the first time, or communities that haven't been involved that much in peace building up to now are feeling the margins. And thirdly, the program that Teresa's involved in, our Personal Youth Development Program, which targets disadvantaged young people at the very fringes of society who are susceptible to paramilitarism, like the young kids that you saw at Lanark Way in Belfast and the peace wall of all the rioting is. That's tends to be our target set of young people. The program that you're probably most interested in is the new one on our new strategy, which is our Connecting Communities program. And what we want to do in our Connecting Communities program is begin to look at more innovative ways of working across border bases. And again, what I mean by innovative, it can be very straightforward. It's perhaps the use of the arts, the use of culture, the use of the climate, the use of social enterprise, a very wide range of options that we would like to see coming forward from communities at grassroots level. So that's the program at the moment. It's quite broad. Its primary focus is on making sure that we have genuine cross-community connections on a cross-border basis that address some of the more challenging conversations that we tend to face. Now, in a nutshell, that's very much who we are and what we do. Looking forward to the questions and answers session later on. I might summarize the essence of our program in the words of the late John Hume. Let us work together, build together, and as we do that, the real solution will begin, the real healing process will begin, and we will erode the distrust of the past. And that's the essence of our new program. John, of course, was one of the three people who championed the establishment of the fund. And one note of caution, I'm sure, as community practitioners, you already know, and peace building. The old Irish saying of the longest road out is the shortest road home is particularly apt in community work. So please, it is a painstaking, slow process, well worth taking the time and being patient to build the foundations of the connecting bridges that bring communities together on border areas. Thank you. That's fun, and looking forward to the questions and answer session.
Thank you very much, Paddy, for that insight into the work of the fund and also your personal experiences of living and working on the border region, and for future opportunities around collaboration. So we'll pick up on that certainly in the panel discussion. If I could maybe just move on to introduce Paul Skinner from Pobal. Paul, if you'd like to say a few words, please. Thank you.
Teresa, thank you very much, and good morning, one and all. And I hope it's nice where you are this morning. I'm in Donegal and it is raining at the moment. So yes, my name is Paul Skinner, working with Pobal, and have, and again, thanks for the invitation to be part of this. Originally from Monaghan, but living in Donegal now. And in a range of work that I've undertaken over the years, it's very much around facilitating community groups and facilitating communities to actually make connections. And as part of the work within Pobal, that happens. And Tom used a phrase at the very beginning, just picking up on what the minister had said, of bottom up. And that's very much the approach that Pobal has taken across a range of programs that we undertake. And it's certainly something that is part of the value system and the work approach that I take. So yeah, like what Paddy referenced, certainly the organization Pobal, as well as myself personally, obviously we worked very closely over the years with the International Fund for Ireland, as well as the Special EU Programmes body. So I am really delighted to be part of the panel. And I suppose if there was one thing I wanted to say at the outset, that I'd really be keen that we get a good discussion that isn't just focused on the panel, but just hearing obviously from all the various participants around the experience and the work that's going on in making connections. With regard to Pobal, Pobal was set up in 1992 by the Irish government. The board is appointed by government, and our work is very much on behalf of government to support communities and local agencies towards achieving social inclusion outcomes. And we do this by managing a range of programs and providing a range of supports for those funding programs. We have a staff of over 600. We have an annual budget now of just over 700 million that is being administered across a range of programs, over 30 programs that in essence are on behalf of 5 government departments. The Minister's Department is our lead department, Department of Rural and Community Development, Social Protection, the Department of Health, Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth Affairs, and then the Department of Environment, Climate Action and Communications. And there are a range of programs that I think a number of you would be aware of, which to some extent probably represents the approach and represents the, what this conference about in terms of making connections in particular, like the Social Inclusion and Community Activation Programme, like the Community Services Programme. And then obviously, and I know we haven't mentioned it much already, but obviously for the last year and a half with COVID, the experience I would expect from quite a number of organizations that's attending has been catastrophic in a range of ways. So from a public perspective, in supporting those organizations, there has been the Stability Fund, which has been operated. I too like the title of the conference, Making Connections and Supporting Cross-Border Collaboration. And we do have a history in making connections, being involved in the Peace 1, Peace 2 and Peace 3 program. Our role at the moment in terms of the cross-border collaboration, which we continue to support, is very much within a very particular youth-based program at the moment, Youth Pact, with the National Youth Council of Ireland, University of Ulster, as well as Cooperation Ireland. And that's about improving the quality of the connections that are made, improving the quality of the cross-border collaboration that's in place. So we're really excited to be part of that project. We see so much that has happened within that particular project. And we equally have seen so much happen during COVID as well, as to how that project has addressed the various challenges within it. So from Pubble's perspective, we are very keen to support all the organizations that are involved here today. And we're really excited about the opportunities that there may be within Peace Plus to support organizations and work collaboratively with a range of organizations to achieve that. So Teresa, I leave it there for a moment, really welcoming the discussion that will take place, and obviously happy to address any questions that might come forward. So,
okay, thanks very much for that, Paul, and for that great overview in terms of the variety of programs that are available. I can say I'm a wee bit envious of all the different initiatives that you're running and supporting. So thanks very much for that. And as you say, hopefully we'll get a good opportunity now in a few minutes to pick up on the experiences around cross-border collaboration, and maybe give some tips and hints around how groups can go about that. So thanks very much, Paul. If I could maybe just then call on Gina McIntyre from the Special EU Programmes Body to give a little introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. And thank you very much for Irish Rural Action and Rural Action and Irish Rural Link for the invite to participate in today's event. I feel like I'm actually among old friends, because I've known Teresa a long time, and indeed the Paul there and Paddy, and we've all together. Can you hear me? Teresa, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear somebody talking.
Maybe a bit of interruption.
But even the people who are on the audience, again, as I say, we've all worked together for a long time, and I think that's very reflective of today's title too, the collaboration. And certainly as we go forward, we will be working together in collaboration, and particularly with the likes of the Rural Futures Programme, and indeed I see there's Dr. Andrew Ford on the participant list as well from DRCD, because what people sometimes forget maybe about the programmes is that they are a collaboration themselves. The Peace Programme, the Interreg Programme, and indeed the Peace Plus Programme is a collaboration between the Irish Government, the Northern Ireland Executive, and obviously the EU. So we work with all of the departments, and therefore we work very closely with what's coming out in North and South in relation to policy, and we align the programmes to that. And Minister Humphreys has already done a wonderful job about introducing the Peace Plus programme. So I would probably just want to give you a little bit more detail about the opportunities that we believe are there for all of you now in the Peace Plus programme. And like the others, I think I'll also confess to the fact that I'm a border girl as well. I spent my formative years in the city of Derry, Londonderry, and so trips to Donegal and Letterkenny and Buncrana and all of that was just part of our life. So I totally understand the issues of people who are living on the border. The overall objective, obviously, of the Peace Plus programme is to build peace and prosperity and ensure that the programme will leave a lasting and tangible legacy.
We continue to take the opportunities and address the needs arising from the peace process in order to boost economic growth and stimulate social and economic regeneration, and obviously to promote social inclusion, particularly for those at the margins of economic and social life. So the programme is going to help address long-standing social and economic challenges which have and continue to have an impact on communities, particularly those in the rural border areas, as the ongoing challenges that exist, not only that already existed, but the devastating impact of COVID-19 and the risks and challenges associated with the UK's exit from the EU. So the programme has been developed in that context, and as I said, we take cognizance of all the policies and the programmes for government. And we were very fortunate. We had the opportunity to get out before the lockdown started last year, and we went around all of the counties, and we heard from everybody, from you living there, what the issues were and what you wanted to see in the programme. And we have had a fantastic response in terms of submissions of what people would like to see. And so we've taken note of that and developed the programme from it. I don't need to tell you about the challenges that exist for rural communities, but I can assure you the programme has been designed with you communities and the rural communities in particular at heart. So based on all that consultation, we have developed a programme which has 6 themes and 21 investment areas within those themes. And there are opportunities for engagement with rural communities and organisations across the vast majority of the investment areas. Whether it's the theme 1, which is about re-imaging communities, and I'd like to particularly reference there the local councils, the local authorities, community action plans, and this speaks to what Minister Humphreys was talking about too, about building from the bottom up, because there was going to be an opportunity, and the councils and the local authorities are already working on this to actually develop their plans from the community, and that will be, it has to be collaboration with the communities, and we're insisting on that. There's also within theme 2, there's an area on smart towns and villages. Again, as I said, we're going to try and align all that with rural futures, and hopefully we will be able to expand, as Minister Humphreys so beautifully put it, light up the whole of the rural community with hubs. And then theme 5 about protecting the environment. So that's just a few, but I would like to focus particularly just on, there's a theme within theme 4, which is about rural regeneration and social inclusion. And it has a budget allocated to it specifically of 50 million. We know the issues that the rural communities have faced, but we also know the assets that they have, the natural heritage, the people, both human assets and resources, and also the local resources. And therefore we wanted to try and I suppose build on those as best as possible. And we also looked at, some of the key areas such as the services in relation to health and transport, that maybe this programme could help bring that more to communities. We have already within the Interreg programme a whole area devoted to cross-border health, and so we'd like to see that continue, because we understand the importance of that. So we have this specific theme, and it's going to hopefully address some of the imbalance and allow the rural communities to thrive and bring the full potential through health and well-being focused solutions. We're going to support social, economic and environmental projects within that theme, very similar to what Paddy was talking about in his programme. And so again, we do align, we do talk to each other, and we will make sure that what we do is trying to complement each other and not tripping over one another. We're also hoping to contribute obviously to sustainable regeneration, social inclusion and the creation of healthy and living communities in rural areas. So the programme will continue to contribute to the creation of a more balanced society in which we want to see rural communities thriving. So examples of the types of activities we're talking about maybe is, the development of centralised facilities to support the provision of key family support services, ranging from early years to elderly people, because we're very cognizant of the isolation and the challenges of that in rural communities. We want to look at also the deployment of resources in support of diversification for the agricultural sector and the development of social farms for social and economic benefit, the development and delivery of rural
specific social enterprise support programs, including those focused on increasing health and well-being. And obviously this will incorporate support for volunteer recruitment and development, product and service development, promotional and sectoral marketing, and look at where we can deliver and expand on the services there. And obviously the development of green infrastructure to promote active lifestyles. And I think I've heard stories recently about the number of paddle boards that have been ordered in Ireland, to the point where the French deliverer thought that the numbers were totally wrong because they were so vast, and they came back to the order here and they said, no, unfortunately, that is absolutely key. That is correct. The numbers are correct. Everybody is out paddleboarding. Haven't tried it myself, but everybody's out doing it up here, certainly, and I'm sure they are across the whole of Ireland. So I'd like to encourage everybody on the call to go to our website, because on that you'll find not only the consultation information document, which sets out the programme, the Peace Plus programme as developed, but also what we did was we did these what we called navigation papers, because we wanted to show all of the sectors that it wasn't just the area that had their name against it that was where the opportunities lay for funding. So if you go there, you'll see that we have highlighted all of the areas within the programme that we believe the rural communities can access. I've just mentioned a couple of them, but there are many, many across. And in particular, there is a small programme, small projects aspect in both theme 1, which was very much focused on reconciliation, but also in theme 6, which is very much focused on the removing the obstacles and challenges of a border. And there's a small project fund there now, which means projects under 100,000, which would lend itself to collaboration on a small level, as well as the bigger projects that we're talking about, such as the smart towns, cities and villages. So please go and look at the website, and if you have any questions, of course, please don't hesitate to contact us. So thanks, Teresa. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks, Gina. There's a wee bit of sound quality issues there at parts of it, so hopefully people were able to pick up the main elements of it. I certainly picked up on the 50 million allocation to rural regeneration theme, which is, very welcome in the new Peace Plus programme. So hopefully we'll be able to have a bit more discussion around that, and hopefully the sound quality is good for everyone as we go forward. So I suppose just to say that this next part then is really an opportunity for those participating on the call to have a chat, I suppose, or a conversation with the panel members, and to ask some questions, particularly around the opportunities that exist, and about engaging in cross-border collaboration. We would ask that if you put your question into the chat box, we will do our best to field those. If you have a particular panel member that you wish to direct the question to, if you can just let us know, because we can then move quickly to that panel member, and we will kick off proceedings. I suppose I have a couple of questions, just maybe while people are maybe thinking of theirs, that we can maybe get started with. So if I could just ask Paddy, maybe first of all, obviously you mentioned the long and sustained track record that the fund has had working on cross-border projects over 35 years. You mentioned the introduction of a new programme on cross-border working, and I just wondered, can you say more to the audience around how to get involved in that programme, and what advice you would have for new groups wanting to engage in cross-border work?
Thanks, Teresa. Firstly, if you are interested in applying, the basic criteria are that it's about cross-border relations. It can be community to community, it can be community to statutory. This essence is that the impact is a sustainable benefit to both communities. That's at its core. To start to look into it, as people probably know, the fund has managing agents who are the point of contact in Northern Ireland, and programme managers who are point of contact in the southern border counties. Those are both on the website. Teresa is a contact for the managing agent in the Northern Ireland context. I think it's firstly just in case people may have the impression that the 3 programs that we have brought into our new strategy from our old strategy, or Peace Walls, obviously the Peace Barriers program tends to be more urban. However, our Peace Impact program, which is our community-based program around getting communities who are outside of the dividend from the peace, from the marginalized, who are building a lot. Those communities, it's not just exclusive. And the program that Teresa manages through Rural Action, or Personal Youth Development Program, can also have a cross-border element. In fact, they're welcome because, as I said earlier, the creative friction that comes about from people who get together from different backgrounds bring to a project. So those still have cross-border elements and are very, very welcome. In terms of our new program, Communities in Partnership, it's fairly broad in the sense that it wants to look at innovative approaches. And again, some people, just in case people have the understanding of innovation as something at the front end of the latest technology or the latest thinking, it's really the application of existing things like the arts, like culture, like the environment, like social enterprise, like well-being, sport. There isn't any anything that we're not willing to consider under the heading, so long as the impact, as I said at the beginning, has got to do with the benefit to increase mutual understanding and engagement and sustainable connections along the border. And also, we're and maybe I'm anticipating this question, we don't define the border as being 5 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles, because really all you've done then has created more borders. So the border program could be a relationship between someone in Sligo and a group in Sligo and a group in Belfast. We're not defining the border, because the border in many ways, as is playing out in Brexit at the moment, can impact people many, many miles away from the border. And attitudes towards the border can be very significant many, many miles away from the border. So it's not that it has to be on the border or 5 miles or 10 miles from the border, but the impact has to be for border communities. So your partner can be, as I said at the beginning, community, either side of the border, community statutory, or community or statutory at a distance with another community within the 12 counties of the remit that we have. That's a good bit of it. I think I've said it. I use the term "the longest road out is the shortest road home." I mean, peace building. We were all, or most of us, were mistaken at the Good Friday Agreement that it was sorted, and now we had to go home and celebrate. And but like many major changes, there's always a tendency to declare victory too soon, and we absolutely did then. We did think we had much more time to work these things out, and many people in the audience today will be familiar with all of that. We thought we had a longer time frame, but in fact, and people like me should have known better. These things don't work out as quickly as you think. Once you stop and think about the challenges that are emerging now, why wouldn't it be difficult? There's been an awful amount of trauma, injustice, difficulty that people have endured for quite some time, right across society. So why wouldn't it be something that takes a really long time? So when you're doing it, be patient with it. Many of you know the ground. I'm mostly talking to the converted, but it's always worth saying that I've come to look at cross-border work almost like the construction of a bridge, and that many times in cross-border work, the pressure is to do the deck. What the engineers, I checked this out with an engineer friend of mine, the crossing. But as he pointed out to me, and it's dead obvious when you think of the construction of a bridge, unless you have sorted the ground out on either side of the water span, unless you've built the foundations, unless you put the pillars in good foundations, whatever deck you put up won't sustain. So just remember that the longest road out, i.e. making sure that both partners are ready to do it, number one. Make sure that the foundations, as you make your way across the span, are very strong, and make sure the pillars on which you're building your cooperation or your collaboration are embedded and solid structures, and then the spans relatively straightforward. And I found that a very useful rule of thumb, because when you see cross-border, the first reaction is, how do we get a cross-border project? The real genius in it is to say, how do we get people ready to do something cross-border, and then do it? And the other way around, you get an early return, but you don't get a sustainable outcome. So that's my own experience of it. And I've worked with Gina and Paul for, it seems to be like forever on this work. And that's maybe my core thing to say. Think of it as constructing a bridge that you want your feel safe crossing. And that means that it's safe at both sides, that your foundations, your pillars are all solid, and then the going across bit is much easier. So be patient with it. It's well worth it.
That's great, Paddy. Thanks for that. And I suppose the flexibility you mentioned there in terms of that new programme is welcome as well. And participants will be breaking into workshops later after this on some of those themes. So it'll be useful to see what comes out of that. Maybe connections can be made around some of the. So thanks very much for that. There is a question in the chat, Paddy, just around, when does the new programme open or launch? If I'm picking you up right, what you're saying is, if people have ideas or want to explore them, they can get in touch with the managing agent or programme managers. In the first instance, if you want to come to ourselves, we will certainly share our contact details as part of the post conference briefing, and we can signpost you. But is that fair enough to say, Paddy?
Yes, the pandemic has meant that the launch that we'd really been looking forward to organising has been postponed, and the way things are, the launch that the way that we want to do it, maybe certainly months out. So rather than wait until then, we've decided that we would operationalise the strategy. So it's as I say, it's open for business, and get in contact with Teresa, or in the southern border counties, Stephen Barrett in Donegal. Many of you Donegal will know him from Leader, Catherine Ryan and Sligo, Leitrim, West Cavan, and Gwen Lanigan and Louth, Monaghan and East Cavan. Okay,
thanks, Paddy. Gina, maybe if I can ask you a question, just I know the sound was a wee bit off there, so it's just to pick up on the consultation, the recent consultation, because I'm sure people have maybe viewed that document, and I suppose it's just to ask, do you envisage any substantial change from that, or can people view that document as the themes going forward and start to plan or to think about ideas emerging out of some of those themes in the document?
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Teresa? Yeah.
Yes, can.
Yeah, absolutely. We were delighted with the public consultation. The statutory consultation ended on the 12th of May. And again, we had an overwhelming response to that. And what was really fantastic was that it was a really positive endorsement of the programme as presented. So, I'm talking about 80–90% in every theme. People agreed and strongly agreed with what was there, and so that was fantastic. So we don't envisage any major change at all. There'll be a little bit of budget maybe in the environment added in as the final programme value is agreed. It's sitting at $1 billion at the minute, and it'll probably be just a little bit more with exchange rate differences and things like that. But so that it'll probably go towards the environment measure. But other than that, the budget is as we have proposed, and there's going to be a lot, picking up on 2 points that Paddy had sort of reminded me of. One of the important aspects in this programme as well is that it's not just for Northern Ireland and the border region. It also can include organisations that maybe you work with naturally from outside of the 6 border counties that might want to get involved in some projects with you. You know, it could be a national organisation and then a particular focus on the border region or whatever. So it's just go and have a read at that part. It's called functional areas, and really what that means is sectoral areas. And the other point to note just in relation to going forward is that we will have a lot of pre-development support put in place for all of the projects, and you know, to help them develop good quality projects. So that's for them and for us and for the programme. We want to use this money as best as possible. So therefore we're going to be making sure that the quality of the projects is as good as they can possibly be.
That's great to hear, Gina, in relation to that pre-development support. So we look forward to seeing how that works out. I'm just conscious I'm in listening mode, but I'm also trying to read the chat here as well. So I don't want to miss anybody out. So there is a few comments and questions, if I can just maybe start to look at those. So a comment or a question to Paddy was, is progress being made in harmonising policies across the border? The inconsistencies in addressing the pandemic spread has not been coherent as it should. Infections grew as a result. So I suppose it's just a view, Paddy, in relation to, you know, is progress being made in terms of harmonising policies?
Well, it's outside of the scope of,
Yeah.
of the international fund. There are challenges. Look, I say I don't know that it's all about this border thing. Behaviours, whether they're in Letterkenny or Derry or Cavan or Omagh or Milford.
Sorry, I lost your sound there. I don't know if everybody lost it or just me.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Paddy.
Just maybe I'm repeating myself, but it is it's outside of the remit of the fund. It's a governmental issue. I imagine everyone's working as hard as they can. It's a moving target. Look, for everyone every day. We've grandchildren in England. We've booked to go several times and cancelled it. We've booked recently and cancelled it. So the issue is a virus. That's in simple terms, and it's unpredictable at the moment. So it's everyone's responsibility to behave the very best they can, no matter what government says or doesn't say. We all know the rules. Wash hands, safe distance, and wear masks. And that's the best I can say on it, Teresa.
Yeah, no, that's fine. A quick one for Gina. Is there a timeline for the rollout of Peace Plus yet?
Well, yes, as Minister Murphy or Humphreys mentioned, sir, we are hoping to have the programme finalised and approved this summer. So, but one word of caution outside of our control, it has to be approved by the Northern Ireland Executive, the Irish Government, and then it goes on to the European Commission. So we are at a very advanced stage of finalisation, and we're hoping to then have the programme open by the end of the year, or at least some of the pre-development support open, because it's our intention in certain number of areas of calls. It's our intention to put out pre-development support for a couple of months before the call opens, so that actually people can start working on projects in earnest. But I would advise you to just start working on them now. Take what's there in the consultation document and start working on that basis.
Okay, thanks, Gina. Another one, this is to all three. So do Paddy, Gina or Paul have any thoughts on the Shared Island initiative, particularly in terms of the work between Donegal and Derry, looking at poverty and social inclusion and exploring a place-based response to social issues? So
I'll just very quickly say, Teresa, that yeah, I think that the Shared Island Initiative is an excellent initiative, and but the Shared Island Fund is obviously more for capital. And what our programmes do is maybe try to pick up some of the softer issues that complement maybe that capital Shared Island Initiative.
And you said it, that's basically the same. It's a capital project, very welcome, excellent. and we'll be picking up the more softer elements, and hopefully people can benefit from the shared island as a result of that. But it's a very, very welcome program.
Yeah, and can I also just say that, Teresa, from our perspective, it's a very welcome initiative. The particular areas that are referenced in the question, poverty and social inclusion, obviously, whilst it's not cross-border, but there are a number of programs, obviously, that we operate that would support various actions within, for example, Donegal, that would, I think, try and do some of what Paddy was referencing in at least supporting one part of the development of the bridge until we move into the place where the cross-border funding is available. So just to reference that.
Okay, thank you. Another quick one, Gina, for yourself. Will councils have input on groups that apply, as they had in previous programme, it says?
Yeah, I understand that question. No, I mean, the councils, as I said, they do have their allocation in theme 1 for which has to be developed with the community. So that will be a community-led action plan for the council, and it'll be co-created by the community. And we already have consultants working with the councils to ensure that that approach is adopted as best as possible. It'll be in line with community planning, and so that's one aspect. But within that same theme, there's also a small project fund that I mentioned earlier, and that will not be run by the councils. So that will be in theme 1 and theme 6. We're hoping maybe to have an implementing body who will look at rollout of those small projects under 100,000, and that is nothing to do with the councils, because they've got their own money and their own plans to process.
Okay, thanks, Gina. I see Anthony Soares has put a wee note into the chat with for those interested in the impacts of COVID-19 and cross-border working. The Centre for Cross-Border Studies has an online survey open now, so if people want to view that, it's there in the chat. So thanks for that, Anthony. I'm just scrolling here, but maybe just as a scroll and see if there's any more questions. Just something for Paul, because I know POBIL is an organisation that administers and manages government and EU funding. So I suppose just wanted to know, you're often on the receiving end of applications, you know, actually looking at them. And so would there be any do's or don'ts of application writing? You know, if people are thinking about working together and putting in applications to either funders, you know, is there any tips that you can give just while I'm scrolling? Thank you.
Teresa, yeah, we'll try and answer that one, because obviously the hallmarks of any program will have an application process regardless if it's cross-border or not. So, and look, one thing maybe just to say at the outset, Teresa, is the extent to which in our experience, the quality of applications, there's a very high standard that is there in terms of those that submit applications. But maybe, yeah, some do's and don'ts. And some of this is obvious, Teresa, so I'm kind of repeating just some of what, certainly from our experience, it would be good just to highlight. Don't leave it to the last minute. Planning, we have seen, is crucial on preparing the application, and I think it's about being clear and focused. And just to know, I think it's important to involve, you know, different people in the organization in making an application. So, and particularly don't forget about partner organizations and how you engage with them and what might be required in any agreements and that in terms of what's been applied for. Don't underestimate costs or budget. It is one of the areas over the years that we've identified that it can be challenging to identify an itemized cost, but it's important, use real costs, and don't forget about some of the obvious costs, you know, and then don't assume the funder knows you. There is, it's important to kind of reflect that the person that's looking at an application mightn't know much about the organization. So it's important not to assume that the funder knows you. And then the last don't would be, don't overwrite. You know, it's important just to answer the questions that are asked. And And obviously more and more online applications, there are word limits and that, so that kind of maybe addresses that. The do's would be read and read and read again what the funders' priorities are. Like Gina and Paddy have particularly mentioned some of the key things in the programs that they're administering on a cross-border basis. It's really important to look at the eligibility criteria, the selection criteria. All of the information is there. Then I think, and it's probably been said a couple of times, it's about being clear on why your project is needed. And then, you know, being truthful about where you are with that project. I think that's certainly important from the perspective of funders. Obviously be clear on what you want to do and what you want to achieve. And that does take a bit of time to work through within an organization, as we all know. I would kind of think that because of the online activity that there is, certainly in feedback that we get, that people recognize the need to do offline drafts first. So it's important to do that. And I suppose it's around answering the questions asked. Simply put, nothing more, nothing less. You know, that's important. And then finally, just the last few things: be concise, factual, and clear, and use plain English. You know, I know there's a lot of acronyms. There's obviously jargon that relates to a range of different areas, but I think using plain English, it's certainly one of the do's that we have seen that works. And then obviously proofread and double check. And if you do, you know, if there's support, and I know Paddy and Gina have referenced it, and we certainly provide support in the application process. So make use of that support. I always say at support sessions we organize, there's no stupid questions. Every question, you know, may be important in terms of just assisting in the process. And can I just say then, Teresa, we do have 2 resources available in terms of preparing to apply and writing an application. They're on our website, www.public.ie. But I certainly wish everyone look over the next number of months, because obviously there's funding coming on stream, and you know, the support that is there, you know, can be availed of. But that's just some of the do's and don'ts in summary, Teresa, that might be of use.
That's great, Paul. I suppose planning is the big key there. And yeah, as Paddy says, build those strong foundations and makes for a good application. I suppose one of the other things just struck me, Paul, is when we work with groups as well, voluntary groups, is to surround yourself with a team of people. Don't assume one person can do it. And I think
that's right.
Sometimes that can happen, that, you know, somebody's left to fill in the application, and, you know, it becomes, you know, a pressure point to get it in on time and stuff. So, you know, do work at the time, use your resources that you have available in your group, and, you know, just plan ahead. And I think, I suppose today's event, being at the time it is, and we know there's programs coming down the line, it's a good opportunity to start planning from today, you know, to start to look at those themes and activities, and have the discussion in the workshops, and try and make connections to build, you know, good projects from today onwards. That would be.
Yeah, and Teresa, can I just add, like, the in terms of organizations, like, and in the team that you're talking about, obviously the board, and you know, is crucial, particularly if there's staff. Like, the board is crucial in terms of having a full sight and awareness of what it is that's been you know, is being proposed. So that you know, that planning in terms of what the need for the project is just so important. And it's been referenced a few times in terms of the bottom up and the evidence to show what it is that you're trying to represent in the project. That process, you're absolutely right. I think there's work that can start now, you know, in the understanding that, for example, what Gina was saying, that it's later in the year things might start opening up, you know.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Is there any other burning questions? I can't see anything in the chat unless I have missed something. So please, if I have, please shout or put your hand up if there's anything missing in relation to the chat.
I'll just say something maybe while you're having a look. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I just wanted to obviously echo everything Paul had said in relation to the applications, and the pre-development support that we'll give will be very much in line with what he's talking about. You know, it'll be workshops, it'll be mentoring, helping, you know, one-to-one, helping people look at, you know, reviewing their applications and helping them. It won't be writing them, but it'll be certainly helping them to do that. And it's important to, you know, really focus for our programme in particular on your either cross-community or your cross-border aspect of the programme. What's really, really interesting for us and quite exciting is that of the respondents that replied to the statutory public consultation, 50% were from organisations that said they'd never been involved before, and they wanted to get involved. And that's really great. But that also brings a challenge of, you know, these are obviously going to be new to this process. And so we would encourage them to maybe link up, particularly if they're looking for partners, with people who have a bit of experience in this area, and think about how they draft the form on that basis, you know. So, but it's really great to see new people get involved with the programme, and we're really looking forward to that. The other thing that we're trying to look at, because the actual calls themselves for, you know, open the application forms coming in, that will be next year. But we're looking at maybe having the money in tranches. So, you know, maybe putting out some of it next year, some of it maybe 2 years later. So I don't want anybody to panic and think that they have to be ready for next year. If they miss it, they miss it. They won't. You know, they might want to start, some of the organisations might want to start with some of the small projects first, which will be much less administratively onerous on them.
Yeah, no, that's good, Gina, and good advice in terms of, you know, small steps maybe leading to something larger in the future. Is there any other questions? I know we're just approaching 5 to 11 here, so we are in good time to wrap up, but it's just if anybody has any burning questions before I draw the panel to the conclusion. Don't see anything coming in. Okay, everybody happy enough? Yep. Okay, well, I suppose, look, if I have missed anything, I mean, I'm trying to scroll through it. If I've missed anything, the questions will be saved. And we will respond to those or put responses out as part of the post-conference information. I suppose if I could just maybe conclude by thanking very much the panel for their informed and passionate contributions. So to Gina, Paddy and Paul, thank you very much for this morning's contributions and for your engagement and for the answering all those questions. I suppose we hope that everybody on the session found it useful, and I did see somebody coming in actually into the chat box to say that they hadn't heard about SEUPB. So, like, I mean, that's brilliant that somebody in this call has connected now with an organisation and potential funding opportunities. So for us, that's a plus to know that this is at least spot about that. I suppose just to say the next part we'll be moving into in terms of themes and workshops. You know, it's an opportunity for people to start to think about projects and what might arise out of the overall event and collaboration. So we hope that you take the opportunities that you heard this morning and the potential that's there to develop and seek funding for your efforts and bring them into the workshops and start to think about ideas on how you can collaborate and start from today. So thank you very much to the panel. We will be looking at the challenges and barriers. So I'm just letting Gina, Paddy and Paul know that. We'll be looking at the challenges and barriers in the workshop and the support needs. We will be pulling together a little report. So we will share that with you as key influencers and obviously funders. And maybe there's things that will come out of that can enhance and support and develop collaboration in the future. So we're maybe a couple of minutes ahead of schedule, Seamus. Don't know if that's a cue for everybody to be able to move swiftly into their workshops, and if you want to come back in, Seamus. So thank you very much, everybody, for that discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Teresa, for that. That was a really good discussion and some great involvement in terms of the chat line and questions. Before we do workshops, we have a short piece on community engagement, and we have two excellent guests, Carol Lamb of Monaghan County Council and Anthony Soares, already busy in the chat line, Anthony, who will be giving some presentations. And at the end of that, we will then have a short break for people to, take a walk or breathe fresh air, have a coffee, and then the workshops. Just on community development principles, I think one of the strengths of getting work done in local communities, whether it's building bridges, whether it's getting water supplies, whether it's bringing much needed services to an area, or just even highlighting the fact that no services exist, is of course the strengths of communities. Communities, at the end of the day, highlight the needs in their own area. They should know best the needs in their own area, and then they bring those needs to whatever agencies or wherever power players that need to actually bring those services to being. And I suppose the history of community engagement, I think, really began to influence matters probably from the mid-70s onwards, when communities suddenly decided we need to actually get involved. And certainly south of the border, even before that, when the rural electrification came into being. But the whole purpose of community engagement is having the capacity to actually do that. And there is a kind of an assumption that everybody who is born into a community has an automatic sort of learning and ability to actually engage and to use community development principles. That's actually something that needs to be learned. And I know in the 80s and 90s, under the famous FOSS program, where many community associations were established under the remit of CE schemes, or before that, SES schemes, one of the great successes of that was the fact that training was part and parcel of those programs. Training meaning the basic logistics as to how do you organize, how do you manage meetings, how do you ensure people, whether they're chairs, secretaries, treasurers, or whatever, have the basic nuts and bolts knowledge to do their job. And then how do you activate in terms of getting your message through? And of course, there is, I suppose, in activation terms, the usual method of protest, which is there and which communities use very well. But of course, alongside protest has to be the ability to propose solutions and the ability to research and develop solutions, so that we can actually say to the power brokers, there is a problem in our community, it's causing a lot of anxiety. What is the solution to that program? And we are going to offer a solution based on our research and based on our knowledge of the area. The other point in terms of community surveys that are often done, sometimes the word inclusion is often forgotten, and sometimes for cultural or other reasons. But inclusion means when you do a survey, have you contacted not just the vast majority of the people, but the various minorities who may not normally reach out. There can be ethnic minorities, there can be disability minorities, or there can be other minorities that are afraid maybe to speak. And somehow we have to design our engagement programs so that they too will have a say. I always give an example of many years ago, the community, this particular community did a great piece of work in finding the needs of the area. And however, there was maybe in a community of maybe 200 people, there might have been 8 people who had significant disabilities in wheelchairs, etc. And they just took the majority of people who replied. And then on the night of the presentation, a person who was in that category asked them, did you contact any of the people with disability? Of course, widespread embarrassment, etc. But sometimes in our haste to do engagement and inclusion, we sometimes don't ask the question, is there anybody left behind? Is there anybody we haven't asked? And you have to find ways and means of addressing that. This is a lesson also for the public powers that be. We hear a lot of consultation processes. Consultation, whether it's the building of an infrastructure, a wind farm, or something which really will engage the community. Sometimes the consultation doesn't really happen until the last moment rather than the first moment. And I think there has to be an education to authorities that you really need to consult and engage, not just consult, but engage with the communities in whatever way is best suited to that community, and do it first rather than last, because if the plans are already written, then it's very hard to change them, and a consultation at the last minute probably is too late. But these are the kind of principles and ideas that we would like to, I suppose, discuss in this conference. How are we managing consultation? How are we managing hearing the voices that we sometimes don't hear? And how do we address a situation where those voices are not heard? So to begin, in terms of engaging people and succession planning, I'd like to introduce you to Carol Lamb. Carol is coming from Monaghan County Council, where they're nurturing community programs in reaching out to communities who are struggling, working with them through the process of developing a community development plan, helping them to develop their project ideas along the way. Carol, you have tremendous experience in this area, and I am now asking you to share that with the audience here today. Carol, the microphone is yours. You're muted there, Carol, so just press the old speak button.
Yeah, got it. Now, okay, I'll try not to swear, as they say on Channel 4. If you hear strange noises in the background, it's the dog. I have not got children trapped in the basement or anything. She gets jealous when I'm talking to other people. Now, let's see, I'll try to keep this quick because I tend to go on. So please, Seamus, feel free to stop me whenever I've said enough. Listen, I'll try to keep this as on point as I can, but I do tend to wander. So again, interrupt whenever you've had enough of me. I thought I'd share with you today some of the work we've been doing directly with community groups and where it's come from and what we've managed to achieve with it. I'm just to check, is that showing up? Have I managed to do this right? Can you see my screen there? Community.
It is, Carol. It is, Carol. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So I'll just click on then. Just where this is coming from is we've been working with our local community development committees, which were specifically set up as really a conduit through which all the stakeholders in local development would come together to agree priorities in the county on all levels of development, social, economic, cultural. And also the idea was that funding aimed at developing local communities would be channeled through the LCDCs. And that has come to pass through a lot of programs, including SICAP that Pobble manages. Leader is channeled in a lot of the areas, including Monaghan, and a number of other COVID-related programs have come as well. So a lot of that, the structures are there now at local level to help out. So you'd imagine then with all these structures and plans are in place, because the LCDCs work from a local economic and community plan, that things would be going great and great things are happening, right? Well, we're finding that wasn't the case in a lot of communities. So we engaged back in 2017, we mapped what money was coming into the county around our communities. And of course, the first thing then was to try and find where the communities were. So that's the map that you're seeing is a bit higgledy-piggledy. You'd say, that doesn't look like the normal Monaghan. We're looking at where people identified as a community rather than the traditional parish boundaries or townlands or whatever. And then we plotted where the funding was actually coming in. And we found that in 2017, over €3 million in funding came into the county. And that you can see where it went to there. But there was a very clear pattern. We felt that the communities that we would consider to be strong were benefiting from multiple funding streams, often where their need was quite modest in comparison with other communities, we felt. But those other communities were often more disadvantaged, weren't managing to secure much funding at all. And we felt this needed to be looked into. And we decided to reach out to those communities and to offer their support, or to offer them our support. So we decided to do this really to, first of all, identify the reasons those communities weren't performing as well as others, to identify the projects then that might be worked up in those communities and turn them into funding applications. And then also to try to improve the capacity of those in those communities, so that the knowledge in those would be in those communities, and the people would be there to lead and to continue on after we left those communities, that they'd be in a better place for us having been there, and that the community would have this roadmap complete with a structure that would help them to continue the work. So from the community's perspective, the journey that we took them on was we met with them initially, put a proposal to them that we'd help them to do a community plan, that we would do it, there'd be no cost to them. They just needed to come along with us on the journey, and all that was required of them was their time and their commitment. So we started out then by doing the community research for them, pulling together the available data on their community for them, bringing it back to them and presenting it to them so that they knew more about their own area. Then we helped them to compile a community needs survey and to carry that out. And again, brought that information back, and we examined together with them, helped them to interpret the data and look at what it meant for them. And from that, then we helped them to do a SWOT analysis, what the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats were presented to their community from the information. And then we helped them to look forward. Where do they want to go? What are they trying to achieve? The community groups that are active in their area, what plans do they have? And we fed those in. And then we looked specifically for the gaps. What isn't there? What's not happening? What needs aren't being addressed? And what projects might be needed to look at the needs that emerged from the needs survey. And then from that, we drew up a draft plan. And sometimes we had to present some hard truths in the draft plan and say, look, this is needed in your community and you have to address this. You're all tiptoeing around this particular issue and you're going to have to tackle this. And part of that draft plan, we helped them to develop a vision of where they wanted to be, what they wanted their community to look like in 10 years' time, and put together aims and objectives and finished up with actions. And of course, then the final part of the picture was the implementation. So how they were going to achieve this, the structures they might need, the partnerships they might have to build up, and how they were going to monitor the progress and know whether things were working or not. So once we had that draft plan together, we go out to a consultation with the community, which again we ran, and people would have their say on that. And then a final plan was produced. And very importantly, that final plan was used as an opportunity both to get people on board with the plan and all the organisations that would play a part in delivering the plan, stepping up and saying, yes, we're buying into this. We also used it to launch any new structures or any big projects that were going to be kicked off straight away. But very importantly, it was used as a community celebration, as something that brought the community together, to unite them and to have a new start and something that they could all buy into achieving together. And that was very, very important for everybody. We found that, okay, they got a community plan out of it, but more important than the plan was the process, the journey that they took together, and the time that we spent with them, and the capacity building that we put into them, the information we gave them along the way. The relationship that we built with the community during the time that we spent with them was invaluable to the community, because they now knew the people and they knew how the council worked. We'd also told them about other structures and organisations that could support them. They had built a relationship with their municipal district coordinator. They knew who that was. They knew an awful lot more about what the council did and who they should contact about what particular issue. They knew about the processes behind, say, things like taking a new residential area and estate in charge, which for some rural communities was an issue with unfinished housing estates and things like that. So it was a very valuable exercise for the community's point of view. We also brought along other specialist staff at times from outside of the local authority. So say if they needed, if the community didn't have childcare service, we would link them into the County Childcare Committee and bring the Childcare Committee staff there, who would explain to them the process behind getting started with a childcare service in their area. So in summary, we would facilitate, sometimes we advised, sometimes we informed, sometimes we helped to develop ideas, we negotiated with landowners, we problem solved, we brought in partners, we helped write applications, whatever it took to move things forward for that community. We discovered there was always a reason why that community had not accessed or was not accessing funding. And so far, we have done about 8 community plans. Always there was a reason why they weren't accessing funding, and it was not always the same reason. Sometimes it was because there wasn't an overall area development group in the community. So while you had your local sport group and your local women's group and your local community centre committee, there wasn't anyone with an overall eye to the development of the overall area. So opportunities like town and village renewal were going past. So the overall environmental improvement of the area was being missed. Sometimes it was warring parties and nobody would work together. So we came in and knocked heads and sort of facilitated through that argument and gave them a new way of developing a new working relationship and cleared the air. And that had to be done before people could move forward. Sometimes it was, you know, a community that had grown recently, maybe with lots of new housing developments and burnout and old committees, maybe resentful of new people not coming in and helping them, and new people not knowing how to get involved. And this new process gave them all an opportunity to get involved in something new and start again together from a base zero and feel more equal. And sometimes it was just a lack of capacity within the community, where they didn't know where to seek funding. They didn't know that they could use things like leverage to turn a small kitty into match funding for and bring in, you know, a larger amount of funding to get a project over the line. And sometimes they just didn't know where the support was, and that they could link into the likes of the community development unit or the social inclusion unit within the council, who could advise them and hold their hands and give them a hand with an application form or whatever to get their project moving again if they got stuck. So when we first started out, we thought we'd just parachute in, gung-ho style, get everybody's ideas on a piece of paper, write it up very quickly for them, and they'd just quickly have a list of projects, and we'd turn that no funding coming into this area very quickly into lots of funding coming into the area. We soon found that would only be a band-aid solution, and it wouldn't be doing any service to the community, and that if the community was going to be sustainable in the long term, we had to invest in the capacity of in building the capacity of the community. So we adjusted our approach to walk them through the planning process step by step, explaining what we were doing and why and how at every step, so that they could recreate this for themselves long after we were gone, and they knew the why, which was so important. The how is one thing, but the why, so that they could interpret it and recreate it in the appropriate setting again and again and again when they needed to in the future. So we turned what we thought was, you know, a 2 or 3 month planning process, in some cases took 2 years. But that investment in building the capacity of the community and in animating everyone to get involved in their community has been invaluable, because it sells everybody in the community the benefits of getting involved with their community, and it champions the volunteers that are already there, makes heroes of them, and gets people who aren't already involved in community. It sells to them the why of the importance of community and why they need to invest their time in their community. And it's working in the communities that we have been involved in. And I want to just show you one particular community very quickly, a little village in Scott's House. It's rural, very rural, near village or near Clonus and near the border. It's typical in some ways in that during the boom, there was a lot of new housing built in the centre of the village, but some of the areas in the centre of the village were left undeveloped when the boom collapsed prematurely. So there was a lot of dereliction, and it was left sort of with an unfinished feel. They had a basic community hall that was built in the early days of peace, so they had that going for them. They didn't have an area development group, but they had a nice tidy towns committee that were trying hard and had made strong grounds in the national competition in recent years. So they had the nucleus of a good ethos in community development. They had the smallest GAA club in Ulster, but they were strong. But they were seeing a decline. Their primary school was declining in enrolment. They didn't have childcare. They had a lot of things needed sorting out. And without that leadership of an area development group, things were, they weren't pulling in funding locally. So they were one of the areas that we decided to work with. So the research and the needs surveys that we did in the early stages identified there were a lot of young families in the area. They identified that they needed a childcare service. They were all driving either to Clonus or to Newbliss and with their younger children. And that meant that they weren't driving back with their older children to the primary school. They were actually leaving their children to the primary schools in those two, either Clonus or Newbliss, and that was responsible for the decline in the local enrolment. They also needed supports for the parents of the toddlers and the younger children that were stuck in this rural village with no rural transport and no supports, no services, and no social outlets. There was no playground in the village. And the other side of the village, or the local population, was that there was a significant older population and they had very different needs. The older housing stock had very poor energy performance. There was a fear of crime in the isolated community. And they also needed a social outlet. They had no way to get into the pub because of the rules about driving home with drink taken. And there was, that left people isolated, especially at the weekends. So they had no trouble highlighting their needs. So what were they going to do about it? Well, some of the things that they were able to do, they created in a very short space of time. Like we started working with them in 2017, 2018. And since then we've developed, or they've delivered, a playground, a teen hangout zone, a community park. They've upgraded the parish field next door, which had a little running track. We've put in road safety measures at the school. They've paved the area outside of the community centre and put in car parking. They're a community on the move. They've also done a few services, or brought a few services into their community. So just show you some of these.
Hey, Carol, I'm going to interrupt. I'll give you about a minute or two just to,
yeah,
okay. Sorry about that.
This is the community park. You can see it's a biodiversity park, which was their choice. The new services, they have a community alert, they have childcare service stepped up already to full day care. And as a result, enrolment has increased dramatically in the primary school. They have a youth group started by a 14-year-old who has won national awards for his leadership. And they also now have, I can't see what's under that. They have new residence committees started in the tidy towns. And they also they've piloted a nighttime local route to facilitate the pub goers around taking people in from the rural areas into the village at night, at the weekends. And they also now, there's been a change to the Cavan Monaghan route to bring in the villages, which allows local children to go to the institutes of education in Cavan and Monaghan. And they won in 2019, they were runners up in the IPB Pride of Place competition. So it just goes to show you the effect that you can have. Now, because they don't have a area development group, we've put in place a community council structure where each active group has one seat. And the municipal district coordinator meets with them every 6 months, and they review the actions of the community plan, what's working, what isn't, what are the blockages, what can we do about them, what are the priorities for the next 6 months, what funding opportunities are coming up, and what do we need to do to prepare. And the council funds a facilitator to help get them through the first year's meetings. So if they're not familiar with how to run a meeting, or they get stuck on committee skills, or things blow up in one of our communities, maybe where things were a bit shaky with relationships between groups, well, the facilitator is there to remind them of the rules that they agreed to, etc. So there's some crucial tools, building the linkages, the learning that we got was spending the time, and also then the training, vital that they train and that they understand the responsibilities, and that they navigate. So final words then, it's never been more important, the work the communities carry out, and the support is there from local authorities, and use it. And our experience is that when council and community work together, there's very little that can't be overcome. So very, very final words. Thanks for listening. Keep up the good work. It's never been more important, the work that communities do out on the ground. And it does matter so much to people. And that's never been more illustrated than during community call. So that's it, Seamus.
Thank you very much, Carol. And you certainly are getting a lot of reaction in the chat, and we'll come back to some of those points. But before that, I just want to introduce you, the audience, to our next presentation, Anthony Soares, who holds a doctorate from Queen's University Belfast. He's also founding director of the Post-Colonial Research Forum before joining the Centre for Cross-Border Studies in 2014. I've come across you, Anthony, in the last year or so. You've been really heading some tremendous work in terms of cross-border work. And I think we're very proud to be part of that as Irish Rural Link, and indeed many of some of the participants on this, especially in the border region, are involved in this work as well. So it's a pleasure to have you at this conference and giving your, as it were, wisdom. The microphone is yours, Anthony.
Thank you so much, Seamus, and hello everyone. I really have to congratulate you all. It's been really inspiring to listen to everybody's input. It's so positive, so inspiring, so much energy, and I hope it might appear that I'm going to try and share my screen now here. It should work. It might appear that I'm dragging you down in the first few minutes after so much positivity, but I promise you there's a reason for it. Because the topic I was given was around cross-border cooperation. It was challenges. Here's a bit what might drag you down slightly, and problem solving. And this is where hopefully I'll bring you back up. But I want to repeat some or stress some of the things that we said. And Seamus, even as he was introducing this session, talked about the strengths of communities. And I think we always, it's always awe-inspiring when I work with organisations from both jurisdictions here on the island of Ireland in the work that we do in the Centre for Cross-Border Studies, some of the initiatives that they're involved in. The Irish Rural Link is involved in with us as well. It's just simply awe-inspiring, the energy, the strength, and that is what I want to come back, the strength of communities, local communities. Yes, there are challenges around capacity around engagement, and some of those challenges in terms of how to, and Seamus mentioned it, is in terms of public bodies and consultation processes. It's communities are often brought in right at the end rather than right at the beginning in true co-design, in true CLLD style, where communities are there right from the beginning. So this is where perhaps the challenge that I'm going to start with because nobody's spoken about this, which is great. The core challenge that I see for all of the great work, and it's not to say that all of the great work that organisations do on a cross-border basis, and I am here talking specifically about the cross-border dimension, the challenge is going to be how we maintain the conditions for cross-border cooperation at the local and community level because of the UK's departure from the EU. And in terms of the solution, addressing that challenge, is that strength. It's working together to communicate and understand the situation. We're going to be able to get through this, but we're only going to be able to get through this if we work together, if we speak to each other, and if we collaborate with one another to make sure that we understand what the evolving situation is in terms of the conditions for cross-border cooperation. There is, again, I'm posing this as a challenge perhaps, but it depends whether you look at this as a half glass full or half glass half empty. I'm looking at half full person, is me. What you have there is the withdrawal agreement between the UK and the EU, and part of it obviously is the much talked about protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland, and within that protocol, in the preamble, there is it's a recognition there by the two parties, the UK and EU, that cooperation between Northern Ireland and Ireland is a central part of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement and is essential for achieving reconciliation and the normalisation of relationships on the island of Ireland. So the protocol is actually the protection for North-South cooperation, for cross-border collaboration, for the kind of work that organisations do in terms of the cross-border work. It's there, it's in the preamble. Not only is it in the preamble, when you actually get into the meat of the protocol itself, the actual legal parts, you have Article 11 there, which sets out how North-South cooperation will be protected and that they will maintain the necessary conditions for North-South cooperation. And then it lists there a whole range of areas of North-South cooperation for which they will maintain the necessary conditions. So there's protection. So there's hope there. There is protection there within the protocol for cross-border cooperation, the kind of work that people are involved in currently, and that the conditions will be maintained for that cooperation to continue into the future. But we do have to be aware of some challenges just to make sure that those conditions are maintained for the type of work that especially local communities do, that small community groups are engaged in terms of cross-border work. And that this is the challenge. It's ensuring that there's visibility for that work. Ensuring that visibility continues going forward and that the conditions are maintained for that type of work. And the reason I'm saying it's a challenge is because there was a mapping exercise undertaken by the UK government and the EU with input from the Irish government and from the Northern Ireland Civil Service, where they were mapping out, they were trying to identify what North-South cooperation was going on and how much that relied on EU regulations, just to see what the impact would be in terms of the UK exit from the EU. And in technical notes that were published later, both by the UK and the EU, they basically admitted the fact that the kind of informal, local and community level cooperation, cross-border cooperation, may not have been included within their mapping exercise. So it's just important that we are aware of that and that we assure that there is visibility going forward for that type of work. So how do we resolve that? How do we ensure that that visibility is maintained and that the conditions are maintained for the brilliant work, the brilliant cross-border cooperation work that's undertaken by communities, by rural communities and rural community organisations? Well, one of them is to understand what's happening, to keep an eye on those conditions as the protocol is now 6 months old, implemented on the 1st of January of this year. And it's a process. The protocol is not a short-term measure. It's actually a process, and we have to make sure that we keep an eye on how the protocol is being implemented and what its implementation means for North-South cooperation. So one of the things that will help us understand what's happening is, and here I'm shamelessly making a plug, the Centre for Cross-Border Studies is now opened the second quarterly survey on the conditions for North-South and East-West cooperation, which is specifically aimed at community organisations and local authorities for them to be able to tell us how they're experiencing North-South and East-West cooperation. It's also about relations between the island of Ireland and GB in terms of all the relations that many of us have working with community organisations in England, Scotland and Wales. We can only understand what's happening if people feed in and tell us what's happening, so that we can then, when we engage with those who are responsible for the implementation of the protocol, that we can give them evidence. Look, this is what's happening on the ground. And hopefully there is nothing negative happening on the ground, but we have to be able to report back on that. And just very briefly, just to give you an idea. So obviously the first quarter was over in March. We did our first quarterly survey then and captured the views of civic society organisations and local authorities on the island of Ireland, north and south, in terms of their perceptions of how things were going in terms of north-south and east-west cooperation. Here I'm really focusing on the north-south element, the cross-border element, and just to say that people were reporting in terms of, for example, the political context. So what are the political conditions? What's the political atmosphere like for encouragement of North-South cooperation? 60% of respondents found that the political context had deteriorated over that first quarter between January and March. The social context around 36%, regulatory context, that's the kind of differences in rules and regulations, 61% found that they deteriorated, and the material context, that's ability to move goods around the islands, but might have an effect on North-South cooperation, around 50%. But we need to have this information to get a clear idea of where we are in terms of the maintenance of the necessary conditions for cross-border cooperation at local community level. We need to engage. One of the solutions in order to make sure that the conditions are maintained for cooperation at local and community level, the informal kind of cooperation that happens, the informal cooperation that happened even at the height of the Troubles. And we have to remember that the strength of communities, that cross-border cooperation was happening in the 70s and 80s, led by civic society organisations, particularly women's organisations, and led by local authorities. They were doing cross-border cooperation even in the most difficult of circumstances. So in order to ensure that those conditions are maintained going forward after the UK's departure from the EU, there's a whole plethora of committees between the UK and the EU. So right up at the top, in charge of everything to do with the withdrawal agreement, not just the Northern Ireland Protocol, is the UK-EU Joint Committee. That's the one chaired by Lord Frost and Maros Sefcovic. And then within that, we have a specific committee that's looking at the implementation of the protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland, and feeding actually into that committee are a number of bodies, including the North-South Ministerial Council, and under that, the 6 implementation bodies, which actually includes the SEUPB. SEUPB can feed into the specialised committee. We also have the Human Rights and Equality Commission for Northern Ireland feeding into that committee. But we as organisations, as organisations involved in that kind of local and community level cross-border cooperation, need to engage with these bodies and try and find means of engaging with those bodies in order to communicate to them how we're finding the conditions for North-South cooperation going forward. The positive as well as the negative. So one of the ways that we're trying to do that in order to ensure that engagement, to find ways of community organisations to be able to communicate directly to those responsible in implementing the protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland, is a group that was established. It's an ad hoc group that was established by the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. It's an informal group. Has a number of organisations from both jurisdictions on the island of Ireland. So this is aimed at community groups and other organisations, third sector organisations on the island of Ireland. It includes Irish Rural Link. It includes a number of rural organisations and umbrella bodies as well, like Rural Community Network in Northern Ireland, who are supporters of the ad hoc group for North, South and East West cooperation. What we've been doing here is coming together, sharing our experiences, talking about how do we ensure together, collaborate together, that the necessary conditions for North-South cooperation will be maintained. And there's a list there of some of the meetings that we've had. In fact, one of the most recent meetings was this week, is with the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Doug Beattie, and Mike Nesbitt, also of the Ulster Unionist Party, to try and get a sense where is the Ulster Unionist Party at the moment in terms of support for North-South cooperation and the institutions under Strand 2 of the Good Friday Agreement. It's open. I would call on anybody here, if they want to get involved, please just get in contact. I put there the website address. That's our Twitter handle as well, the ad hoc group. Please get involved. It's a means of us communicating to them. And it's really important that this group exists, because it's a group that brings together organizations from the 2 jurisdictions. Because it's really important, if you're talking about protecting, maintaining and understanding North-South cooperation, you can't do it by just speaking to organizations on one side of the border. Cross-border collaboration is a dialogue, it's cooperation between 2 sides. So the ad hoc group gives you that platform for organizations from the 2 jurisdictions. Again, I would call on people to take part in this survey. Open at the moment. It is closing very, very soon, in order for us to understand from you what are your experiences around the conditions for North-South cooperation. It's voicing your concerns or just your views. It will help us that. But here's where we come. If this is really positive, all of it's positive. Irish Rural Link were involved. They are supporters of something that was developed. It started its development on the ground in 2015. A new common charter for cooperation within and between these islands. It again brings together a whole host of organizations that develop this common vision for cooperation. And it's grassroots organizations, community organizations from Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, but it also brought on board then organizations from Scotland, England and Wales. It's their common vision around what cooperation should involve. And crucially, it talks about organizations, community organizations being involved in the shaping of strategies, policies, legislation that can have a cross-border dimension and that will support them in their efforts to collaborate with one another. So again, I would ask you to get involved in the new Common Charter, express your support, get involved with that, and I'll put the website there again. And I would just like to thank you for shamelessly, I'm here, but I just found this really, really positive, what I've heard up to now. And I'm so inspired by the strength of everybody here and the organizations that are here. And I want us to exploit those strengths and make sure that we continue to maintain the conditions that we can continue to collaborate going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And I know from talking to you and at the meetings, etc., that your passion and your dedication to this area is absolutely second to none. And that was indeed a great presentation. I'm just conscious of time, folks, but I'm looking at some really good comments that I hope you've seen in the chat box. Michael Kenny, you've talked about the identification of capacity building, and both of us have often talked about that, you're right. And I think what I'll do is address maybe a couple of things to Carol and then to you, Anthony, but we will try and finish in the next 5 minutes because we're slightly now going over time. And I'll let James explain then. Just in terms of Michael's point, and indeed a few other points coming up, Michelle Murphy and Tara Farrell, I see as well coming in. I know, Carol, when it comes to capacity training and all of that, do you still see that as essential for communities? Because sometimes we assume communities, because they're active, that they already have the ability to make the best or put the best foot forward. Do you still see that as an integral part of any kind of training program? Paul Skinner touched on it earlier as well. Carol.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's one of the things that we noticed over the last, even going back 10 years, the capacity of the communities around County Monaghan has dropped back significantly from what it used to be. Now, a lot of our communities benefited during the early days of peace, particularly because they were able to access funding to have staff, in particular development workers, to work within their communities, and it brought them on so much. And you can see the ones that have managed to sustain that momentum successfully, and the ones that haven't. And it's not always the ones that had development workers that have sustained the momentum. Some of them have slipped back, and as a result, the capacity within their community has dropped away. And it seems to be that the ones that have remained successful are the ones that didn't leave it all up to the development worker. They remained active as a committee and continued to build their committee's capacity while they have their development workers. But there is a very big job of work to be done to build capacity around the county again. And it's something that we've had conversations with the development groups like Monaghan Integrated Development. The leader program has put some money aside for development plans and capacity building so that groups can access that funding, because it is a need. It has slipped back, and without it, the communities, as we've seen by mapping, they just don't know what's out there, and they don't know how to access it, even if they do know it's there. And if they did access it, they don't have the ability to manage the resource that they put in place. So without the capacity building and the constant training and renewing of skills and bringing on new volunteers and succession planning, the community isn't sustainable over the longer term.
Okay, thanks for that, Carol. Sarah Burke is making a very important point. Local development companies can also partner with communities for planning work. The highlighting of smart villages under the traditional leader program and hopefully under the new leader program of 2023. And I would concur with that. I think leader and partnership companies really do enormous work in this area anyway. And certainly in Irish Rural Link, we've always said that very publicly and would continue to support that work because it's on the ground and it really is reaching those people who need it. And we all need it. You know, it doesn't matter how good we think we are, you do need training and you do need capacity. Just Anthony, on the cross-border, I know something I saw recently which tied with my first experience many years ago doing work on the cross-border area. Somebody said in a documentary recently that, you know, when the border was drawn, communities, of course, were split, and we all know that. And they had to almost devise a way of managing and living with each other, while at the same time trying to almost stay away from the obvious political elephant in the room. And certainly when we were there back in the 90s, you know, we did some really extensive surveys talking to people. And I suppose we were struck by, first of all, the commonality of what was their issues that affected them. And in a strange kind of way, the difference because of the traditional and political situation that they found themselves in, that they didn't really manage then to communicate, which contributed to many problems. And I'm just wondering, do you see that improving, Anthony? And how do we make it improved in the post-Brexit era?
Very, very, very good question, Seamus. I think one of the mistakes that can be made is if we ignore some of those difficulties. So, for example, in the development of the new Common Charter, right at the beginning, we deliberately went out and looked for organisations that might have a different view on the value of cross-border cooperation, just because of let's say their political perspective. And there were some really difficult conversations, but at the heart of it, cooperation, cross-border cooperation, should have nothing to do with politics. Cooperation happens because people need to live together. It's very often actually a positive story. It's not necessarily around addressing a common problem. Sometimes it's this unexploited opportunity that communities from two sides of the border understand that if they come together, they can exploit their strengths much more, make much more of them. But the post-Brexit context, it has, let's just say, reinvigorated some of the tensions that might have been underlying there, brought them to the fore again. But nevertheless, on the ground, communities, I think they're way ahead of the politics in this. The communities are really ahead of this in terms of, yes, there are differences around constitutional issues, but they understand the need to cooperate. What some communities do, and I'm so glad it's been spoken about here today again, and being highlighted again, what some communities are very honest about is their capacity. There's a lack of capacity, a lack of expertise, and they're looking for it in order to engage in really good cross-border cooperation. And when I mean good cross-border cooperation, I mean real, genuine cross-border cooperation, which is, which is working all the time together. So yes, drawing down funding, but using that funding to work together. And there is a capacity issue there that people are honest enough, but communities are ahead of the politics.
Thanks for that. We could really, I would love to continue this particular, but I'm really thinking of time. I'm also thinking of your maybe tiredness and sitting at the screen since this morning. So before you get a chance to take a break for about 5 or so minutes, I'll ask James to come in and do the logistics in terms of what's next, and also to tell you when to come back and log back in. Okay, James, I can hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Seamus, and thanks to Carol and Anthony for excellent presentations, and to the panel earlier on as well. So Seamus says we're just going to take a 5-minute break. So if people come back around 3 minutes to 12 to be precise, we'll break people into the group. So if you haven't already, let me know what group you want to go into. Please just let me know in the chat function. So we'll go into the breakout rooms for about 40 minutes. You'll hear presentations and we'll discuss a couple of key questions. And then we'll take a quick 5-minute break and we'll let you go into the workshops again. So you get to pick 2 workshops out of the 5 and hear the presentations from some excellent speakers and get some have some fruitful discussions as well. So if we continue the conversation from the chat. So if we get people back in just 5 minutes time, please. And if you haven't already selected a workshop, please just drop me a message, direct message, or even just stay online and say it verbally to me. So see you all in 5. Thank you.
So I welcome you back, and I hope, from what I'm gathering, I hope there were very good workshops, and certainly from the comments I'm hearing from people, it seems there was a lot of discussion. So at least that's the great advantage of having those workshops. I suppose, as James said earlier a minute ago, in a live situation now, we'd be herding you all back into different rooms, etc., etc. But it's a different experience doing it on the platforms like these, and it'll be interesting to see, how much of a feature in our lives these platforms will have post-COVID. I think we're ready to hear some brief points, and my only notes to the facilitators that I'm going to call is, please stay brief. I know you've a lot to report, but you will be putting together the reports, and we'll be putting all those together and making them available. So if you hear people repeating, don't do that, because we want to keep it as concise as possible. So maybe I'll start with Teresa. Maybe if you will give your first report in terms of what you saw happening in your discussions.
We were workshop 5, smart villages. So I suppose just to say from the outset, the concept covers, a lot of areas. The workshop concentrated on one area, which was the use of ICT for the delivery of essential services. And Pat, provided a very detailed and vibrant presentation on how one village in Coothill is creating services that can be used in lots of different ways. In terms of groups, businesses, communities, clubs, all coming onto one platform. So it was a bit of a marathon run through, I'm sure, as everybody's workshops were, quite quick to get everything discussed. So hopefully I will do this justice. But just to say, we have taken notes, so we will have further notes to feed back into the Irish Rural Link at the end. So, and the first question was around barriers and challenges, and things I suppose that come up around that in terms of smart villages was the challenges associated with capacity. and I'm sure you would assume that would come up. The concept itself around smart villages and the need to raise awareness of the potential of smart villages. And we talked about this, I suppose, in the context more generally, but also in Northern Ireland, where smart villages might not be as widely known or familiar. So about raising the awareness of the concept itself. Rural areas are made up of lots of small groups, so maybe getting a group to take on the project could be a challenge. So one solution, and this was going back to the types of things that Carol had said in her presentation, was, you know, how can communities work together? How can you know, get communities, maybe lots of smaller groups, to form an initial working group and have some sort of group at the local level. Need for data, comparable data, and standardized matrix, and to start to talk in standardized language. You know, one community may talk about business, the other may talk about the economy. So it's trying to standardize that, you know, as well, was seen as one of the challenges, but something that was needed. In terms of policy changes or support that might assist with this theme, there was discussion around enablers, facilitators to work with groups and communities, and that might only be for a small number of hours per week, but to try and have some sort of support worker or enabler to help take smart villages forward. Also to tap into local resources. There are lots of people out there who like to you know, maybe write or take photographs or whatever, and it's trying to tap into that. We did have a bit of discussion as well around the potential for young people, especially within the whole theme of smart villages and the whole digital side. But I suppose not to take for granted that all young people know how to use these platforms either, and that, you know, if we can invest a bit of training potentially in young people, then we're investing in their future, but we're also investing in them, you know, for community development and staying with communities in the longer term. So opportunities for young people to get involved in this area, but support them with training and guidance, and hopefully that will lead to longer term succession planning. I think another thing that was said at the end as well was around the sharing of practice and being able to share lessons from other villages, and if there was something, I suppose, that Irish Rural Link and Rural Action could do in that. Somebody mentioned that we should be doing these types of things weekly, even, you know, just to tap in, you know, bring different communities together that are trying to get involved in these themes and have some sort of networking at a local level. And I think, Pat, do you want to jump in quickly if there's anything else? I don't want to do it an injustice, but I
think you have a very good summary there, Teresa. So I'm happy with that.
That's great. Excellent. And yes, I hear your point, Teresa, in terms of Rural Action, Irish Rural Link taking this forward. Maybe I'll ask Brendan Mullery to come in now at the stage next, please.
We were looking at rural tourism, particularly in the context of North-South relations, and that the area of the presentation context was the Slieve Ba tour area, which is in North Monaghan and also straddles into Northern Ireland. So it's a huge, you know, covers a huge area, and there's a lot of challenges in that area. So North and South, the theme that jumped out was the need to synchronize funding cycles between jurisdictions because they don't often match up, and that would make things a lot simpler and make more cooperation a lot more possible. And also the fact that, you know, just to kind of create pathways so that individuals and groups North and South can, you know, meet and work together, I guess, a little bit more effectively. One point that Carol made was that, and this is probably as relevant within each jurisdiction as across jurisdictions, is the fact that transport routes, you know, if an approach to tourism were to follow transport routes, it wouldn't necessarily follow like partnership company routes or county boundaries or jurisdiction boundaries. So if we follow where tourists want to go and then build the support resources around those maps, that would be a good approach. One example that popped up twice from Mayo in the two conversations was the use of, they're developing a new technology where tourists can go into a local, we'll say, off the beaten track rural area that's not well known to tourists, and they can scan, they can use an app to scan the local area and get immediate real-time feedback on what tourist resources are there. And that was kind of important. And there's a lot of potential there. From that, from Kerry, we got the example of food tourism and the importance of using technology to enhance, you know, the potential for food tourism in all parts of the country, not just in the traditional parts where that's well established. Carl was talking about government policy, and an example that's trying to extend tourism beyond the busy traditional places is a newly launched Hero project here in the south, which what I can gather is there to kind of, you know, showcase hidden rural tourism or places that people just typically wouldn't travel. So that was really the main points that came out of our discussion.
Interesting, interesting indeed. Lots of questions we could go into there, Brendan, but I'll just move on. Michael, maybe you will.
Right, Seamus. I suppose the main things coming through from the social enterprise group in terms of the barriers and challenges, and again, there's been a wee bit of overlap with the other groups presenting, but our participants were looking at, you know, maybe constraints within the core work of the group, and again, whether that was contained within a letter of offer or a service level agreement. So again, we've seen that may be putting off people from participating. There, I mentioned the word procurement. Procurement was seen as a major issue and the minefield that can present. Again, there was issues around maybe regulations, including VAT and thresholds within the various jurisdictions. And again, we also talked about income generation. Sometimes that was off-putting, and again, it maybe was to the detriment of the group, that if they were providing a service or goods, that if there was any income being generated, that it maybe wasn't seen that it was come back into the community, but they were actually generating income. And again, that was seen maybe as a challenge. If we move on to the changes required maybe to current policy or thinking, again, we thought that there need to be greater flexibility even in relation to finance. We talked about leader, and again within the rural development programme, the fact that the social economy or social enterprise was receiving grant aid of 50% rate. And again, that was off-putting. Where were they going to raise their other match funding from? We talked about de minimis rules. So again, looking at de minimis. And again, everybody felt that maybe a more joined up approach was needed, and that everybody were kind of working to their own policies as such. So again, it was kind of reviewing sort of what people were doing within their own policies. And then when it came to the support in question 3, a lot of recognition too, there's different levels of support required. And again, not knowing that maybe groups and projects are all at different stages. Again, from ideas development right through to implementation, and equally as important, aftercare was mentioned as well. There's a need for social enterprise policies and encouraging buy-in from various stakeholders. Again, study visits, we need to look at other areas in relation to what they're doing. A couple of examples cited in relation to the UK and the delivery of healthcare and social care, and looking at that. And finally, there's a couple of other issues raised in terms of legal structures for groups and having the appropriate business model and making sure that there would be the right model to take a project forward. And then I think finally, just to finish on, it was basically knowing who all is out there to help support, how they could support the groups or the social enterprises, and knowing what support could be availed of. And that was basically the feedback from our group.
Thank you, Michael. Again, lots of food for thought, and we certainly, in the final report, will be really looking at the points raised there. Shane McGuinness, can you report from your group?
Great, I shall do, and I'm not going to cover some of the overlaps because at this stage there will be. Just generally speaking, lack of knowledge on the ecological or biological metrics that we're needing for this. So sorry, we were looking at the environment and biodiversity. So the capacity is required, however, to establish that ecological baseline to know where we need to go. Expertise on how to apply was seen as a very big limitation. So maybe a node for applications is required. More information is needed generally on how to apply and where to get that expertise. We did talk about changes in overarching policy being as important as bottom-up action is from people's consumer behavior or whatever. Top-down guidance and investment is extremely important on this. And I think maybe we don't often focus on that. And there is some of that coming. We talked about communication and education providers that need to maybe encourage their outreach. So bringing knowledge and expertise to those local communities as opposed to them being elsewhere. I'd like to just finish on 2 quotes because, as I said, we've overlapped with quite a bit of what's been said here before, but 2 quotes that I think rounded off our sessions were first, we need to feel this inside, not outside, which I think is really important, especially around biodiversity and climate change. And also that there's desire there, but where do we start? So there's both positivity and a little bit of concern or anxiety as to where we go from having that concern. That's me.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, 2 really good quotes. I suppose if you don't really feel it and understand it, you don't act, and that's the downside of that. Very good indeed, Louise. What was can you come in with your report, Louise?
Yeah. So our workshop was on the health and well-being, and the presentation focused on loneliness and how that impacts overall health and well-being, and looked at loneliness before and after the pandemic, and some interesting findings which you wouldn't have what we normally perceive loneliness to be, and who experiences more kind of was flipped in the studies and from the data that was used. So like it looked during the pandemic, people in urban areas felt it more than rural areas, and I suppose it was felt more among younger people than older people, and I suppose that kind of came across from some of the I suppose how we addressed loneliness during the pandemic, and it was brought up how a lot of the focus on projects like the community call projects, that was all focused on kind of older people and engaging older people in different activities during the pandemic, or ensuring that they weren't left behind when a lot of younger people were nearly blamed for the pandemic, or if there was increased rise in cases. So I suppose looking at that, how we promote loneliness needs to be rethought, I suppose, and ensuring that it's an experience felt by anyone. Like Roger, I think, had to leave, but he said, we need to think loneliness as hunger, thirst, and pain, and that when you feel it, to address it quickly. If you let it grow, it does get more difficult to address. The other point as well was another point that a lot of the time social isolation and loneliness are brought in together, and we need to kind of separate them out as well, because you don't have to be lonely and isolated. They're not 2 of the same, and that we need to start thinking about separating those out again. I suppose another point that was made was just looking, I suppose, at the town planning, and I suppose in response to the increase in urban areas, and it was felt by someone who did do volunteer with Meals on Wheels during the pandemic, and in, we'll say, older housing stock or terrace housing where there was no garden, older people were a lot more nervous to go outside because they're out onto the street and in public space, compared to someone with a garden. So I suppose looking at that as a policy issue, looking at how towns are planned and access to green spaces for people. Looking as well, I suppose, how young people connect with each other is a lot different. Older people stayed in touch by the telephone, but still, heard another person's voice, whereas younger people, they're on on social media, they're, you know, on gaming consoles, but they don't get that direct interaction with a person. So I suppose another point that was raised about the importance of that sense of place and sense of belonging within a community, and having the gatekeepers to bring people together and encouraging involvement by everyone in the community. And sometimes as well, the structural factors, you know, people's income, people's, you know, if people are living in poverty or in lower socioeconomic areas, that there is that often that higher level of isolation as well. But also the access to social capital, access to services that need to be addressed as well to help combat loneliness. So as well, like a lot of funding to support projects, a lot of funding has been lost over the years on community projects, and, you know, to bring that back to adequate levels. I think there were some of the main points, but if anyone had anything else that was in any of the workshops, if they want to put it into the chat, and we'll record it as well.
Okay, I think that's all of the facilitators, I hope, just in case I've missed out anything, but that's on my list. So clearly we've had a great deal of feedback and a great deal of discussion in the workshops, and certainly we will be looking at that and poring over it, because I think, as Teresa said, we have to see how do we manage this going forward in terms of joint initiatives, etc. So I'm just conscious again of time and coming to the end of the conference, and indeed your time here all day so far. So maybe before I ask our chairman, Tom Lavin, to close, Teresa, will you say a few words, and then I'll go to Tom.
Okay, thanks, Seamus. Look, I'll be very brief, just to thank everybody for sticking with us throughout this morning. Some great discussion. We've definitely taken a lot of feedback from it, and great opportunities, I think, for us to work together and to look at some of these themes and initiatives, especially in light of the fact that, you know, there is funding available through Peace Plus and also through the International Fund for Ireland. So I think there's plenty of opportunities. We'll definitely be taking on board the feedback through the workshops and seeing and working jointly with Seamus and James and co to see what is it that we can do to try and support communities both north and south to avail of the opportunities, but more importantly to build those relationships. So thank you very much, Seamus and James and co and Tom, for the opportunity to be involved in this, and we look forward to working with you in the coming months.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And now I hand over to the chairperson of Irish Rural Link, Tom Lavin. Tom.
On behalf of Irish Rural Link and Rural Action Northern Ireland, I just want to say sincere thanks to everyone who worked on putting this conference together. To all our guest speakers, to those who led the breakout sessions and those who made inputs, and a big thank you especially to everyone who attended. Making connections is vitally important. It is timely that we have had the chance to discuss using funding opportunities with cross-border collaboration. Zoom is a very useful communications tool and allows us to connect with each other. Today we had well over 100 participants. The conference gave a great opportunity to articulate the importance of the local community in development, and to hear it firsthand from Gina, Paddy and Paul what informs their organisation spend, and to express our thinking and act on these important matters. The challenge now is to reflect, collaborate, plan and implement initiatives with and for the benefit of our local communities. So thanks again and enjoy your lunch.
Okay, Tom, thanks very much for those comments, and I think you echoed very well what I hope will be a strong connection between all of the organisations who have participated today and who will no doubt work together in the future. As Tom said, please enjoy your lunch. Thank you again for being here. And we have plenty to think about as we move in these strange times. So once again, thank you. Thanks again just to the staff, as Tom has mentioned, that worked so hard behind the scenes. Thank you as well. Okay, enjoy the day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.